welcome to Your Place in Space. I am Michael Bloxton, CEO and founder of NebulaSpace Enterprise. And today we have a very, very special guest. I am so honored to have one of my favorite authors. I would call it's hard science fiction space, right? It's where that science fiction is real, right? That's
I've taken to calling it space tech to some degree, but I write high tech thrillers, space tech thrillers, because science fiction. There's science and tech all around us now, so it's almost just fiction. But sci-fi,
exactly.
Tech.
The author Daniel Suarez, everybody. Dan, I got to read your. You have so many accolades. I actually have to read this one. There's no way I was going to memorize this. So Daniel Suarez is a New York Times best-selling author, TED Global speaker, and former systems analyst whose unique brand of high-tech fiction explores the causes and impacts of rapid technological change. The author of 7 novels, he has a track record of anticipating what's next, and his latest book, Critical Mass, which I love, due out from Dutton, January 31st, 2023. Now, I've already read it, and I can't wait to listen to it. So I've already got the Audible book downloaded too. So
that's great. Thanks for that.
Critical Mass brings readers on a daring journey to the new frontier of private space exploration. The second book in the Delta V series, Critical Mass, realistically, and I totally agree with that, realistically portrays humanity's urgent transition from an earthbound to a spacefaring civilization and brings home why that's critical to our future. Daniel Suarez, the amazing author, I am so blessed to have gotten connected with you, and we have so many fun conversations. There's so many different places I want to go, and I hope the audience is prepared. One of the things we were just talking about our mutual friend Pete Gerritsen, who we recorded just a little bit ago.
He's
One
great.
of the things that this entire podcast is meant to do, the name is Your Place in Space, right? So the idea is that anyone in the world can find their place in space. Doesn't matter if you're currently a plumber, a fashion designer, doesn't matter. We want to help you find your place in space. Absolutely. And in general, we have 4 archetypes that we're going after. We want to solve really big problems. And one of them is a visioneer, that entrepreneur that just has this crazy big vision. The other is an engineer, someone who understands engineering, how to build things. Another is a scientist who understands how to not violate physics. And the fourth one, which I strongly believe in, is a creative. I think it's the power of the 4 of them together that is going to solve these big problems. And you are squarely in the creative side of things. And I am so thrilled to be able and so inspired when I read your work. And I've read it multiple times. Like I just said, I'm going to listen to it again as soon as it comes out here. So anything you want to share, anything you want to tell the audience about being a creative, I am a space visionary entrepreneur all day long, and you still moved me. So I'm so grateful for that.
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah, I will say thank you. That was a very gracious introduction. My gosh, I feel humbled by it, actually. But I would say what I see my role in this, you briefly mentioned it, narrative. That is trying to inspire people as I've been inspired by people who are actually doing these things. It is a feedback loop. What is accomplished by scientists and engineers and investors like yourself inspires me. And then I want to try to look a little into the future and try to prototype a future of what might be possible. And more than that, I also want to try to create a narrative so that people can really feel something about that possible future. Good, bad, that's been a recurring trait throughout all of my fiction. What's different, I think, about these 2 books so far in this trilogy, Delta V and Critical Mass, is it's not a cautionary tale. It is an aspirational tale. And that's because I think there's just an incredible amount of opportunities. There's risks, of course, but opportunities not just for business and for rescuing our climate, but for also learning how to work better together across the globe, cooperating with each other. It's sort of the overview effect that can cause us to do these very challenging things. And instead of being in competition with each other, realizing how immense the universe is and that we can cooperate with each other and go explore it.
Beautiful. I think you nailed it, Dan. I really do. I think you brought together something that everyone can connect to. when they read that. Now, your background is in space. I feel like you're a brother from another mother here. I have no business being in space, and yet here I am. You
I have
had
to correct you just a
cybersecurity.
bit. I have to correct you just a bit. I did not work in the space industry. I worked in the software industry, although
Yep.
I did work in aerospace and other things in relation to that business. So I ran a software consultancy for many years, designing complex systems for very big companies, one of which was Litton Industries, was a big government contractor. So just clarify.
Yeah. No. Well, let's tease that out, because the point is that the understanding and the vivid imagery that you write in these books is so inspiring to me. Yet you're running a software company, and now you get into space. How did that transition happen? Why did it happen? Like, why did you decide I'm going to nail this space thing?
I'll be very quick as I say this because I tend to go on about this. But what happened was initially I published my first book. It became a New York Times bestseller unaccountably. It's kind of a surprise to me. I was working in the software industry at the time. And the success of that book allowed me access to people so that if I wanted to write a book about something, I could approach experts in various fields. And, this is just the way it goes. They Google me and they say, oh my gosh, I'll talk to you. And then I'd go visit them. And that's sort of been the repeating pattern for my work is I will be concerned or interested in some sort of technological or scientific endeavor, something that I think is going to be important. And over the course of my career, of the books I've written on topics like lethal autonomy, that is robotic weapons, genetic editing, unaccountable control through software manipulation, all of these topics. And I've then been able to use my platform to avail myself of experts to help step me through it. So in some ways, what I view I'm doing is meeting with all of these very focused subject matter experts and helping to bring their work out and make it accessible to mainstream readers, to help them understand the nuances and how these can affect their lives, these new technologies.
If you're going through this path, was it a natural progression to end up in space? I mean, you talked about AI, you talked about cyber. I mean, a lot of present things, but did it just naturally come to space?
Well, I have to confess that I always had an abiding love for all things space. I read Cosmos, Carl Sagan's Cosmos, and watched the documentary as a young man. Read Gerard K. O'Neill's High Frontier many times. Lots of sci-fi, hard sci-fi as a young man, as a boy. I just absolutely loved it. In 1980, when the space shuttle was going up, I mean, I was all in. I was there. And I think we all thought at the time, around the time of the Apollo missions going into the shuttle missions, that it was starting, that we were going into space in a big way. And of course, we all know what happened and why it happened. And that's what I think partly those who see the importance of space in humanity's future really feel it and don't view it as a distant requirement, something that we need to do now. I think we can see that there's been a change technologically and also culturally. I think there's a mindset change. And that's what I wanted to capture in these books. But more than that, I started to become interested in this idea that exactly how would we make that leap? Because we've been having this conversation amongst ourselves for decades now that, well, we're going to be in space. And so we see sci-fi shows, movies, and we read books where that's a fait accompli. We have an expansive celestial civilization already underway, and it may be in conflict or it may be in peace, but it has already happened. And I think my concern there is I don't think that that's a given. I think we have to choose to build it. I think if we're not careful, anything from a Kessler syndrome, that is, blocking us off from going into orbit, or conflict, or just society starting to unravel, whatever it may be, we do not have an infinite time to make this leap. And if we do make it, it will open up just limitless vistas for us all. So that's why I really wanted to tell this story. I didn't want to leave it to chance. I wanted to say, here is one way that this could happen. Here's one narrative where it could happen.
And I will, again, commend you on that. It is extremely realistic, both in Delta V and in critical mass, this is absolutely a path that could happen. Is it the most probable? Is it the most likely? Irrelevant.
Yeah.
This is a path that could
It's
totally
one
happen.
path. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have my personal bias as to the path I want to get there on, and what I feel that myself and my friends are working on. Which
I hope you succeed. By the way, I hope you succeed.
Absolutely. I mean, you called excuse me. You called most of us out in your acknowledgments that are all working on this vision that you have.
Well, you guys inspire me. You do inspire me. I mean, you are the people who are doing this in the real world, and that's a big risk. It's I feel honored to be able to try to tell these stories. I do so honestly. I look at all of the angles that I can, and I try to tell the story in as gripping and realistic way as possible. But I want to get people, mainstream readers, to really see why this is relevant. That what you're doing is not an esoteric pursuit.
What would you say the goal, if you had a number one, number two goal of critical mass, when it lands and somebody gets this, who is that person and what do you want them to get out of it?
I initially would like these books to sort of be a net that sort of captures people's attention and collects people who might be interested in space. For example, I've received emails from young people who say that they email me to say, I read Delta V, and now I'm going to go study astronautical engineering. And that just makes my day. It's this idea that I get it. There's not just a future in space, as you say, but for me, like I can do this, that there's going to be enormous opportunities, growth, and it's going to be a fascinating adventure. That's partly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to inspire anyone who reads it to think, wow, this is the future does not have to be bleak. It's not a drumbeat of doom. We can dust ourselves off and go build a future that's worth living in. That's what I want to get across.
I love it. I'm going to say I love it too many times. I'm going to ask Ashley to cut out my I love it. It's when some speakers say too many times, I'm going to say I love it too many times with this one.
Okay. Well, that's more agreeable anyway.
Yeah. I think I'm interested to know from a creative perspective. Again, I am inspired and I can't wait to read it again. I can't wait to go into that world and experience how you laid it out again and see things from different angles. I think I read Delta V 3 different times.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
It's always this energetic push and boost. And again, my vision, and most listeners here have already heard, Nebula is providing all of humanity access to deep space and infinite resources. Yeah. Multi-decade plan, many companies to make that happen. And I'm still inspired by what you write constantly.
Oh, that's great.
So
that's great.
If I feel like I'm getting low or disconnected, I'll get into the book and I'll get back into that feeling of, okay, that's the future.
Oh, that makes me feel terrific. That does. And it couldn't make me happier. And let me also be clear, though, when I first heard of the reason you and I are talking is I was inspired, again, by what you guys were trying to do. That's a key. It is a feedback. It's a circular system where creatives and those who implement, those who actually visioneer and then build these things, it's an iterative process. And I think that's 100%. Back for centuries. So we all have a role in it. And I'm excited. I'm excited that I feel that change is on the horizon and really positive change.
Yeah, amen to that. So when I think of creatives, the way that I think about from what we're doing in those four archetypes of trying to bring these people together to solve these big problems or lay out a plan with a bunch of different smaller problems that these four types of people can get together and work on. And from that perspective, when I think creative, I think of someone who can help the visioneer, the engineer, the scientist articulate what they're trying to do in a way that makes sense, because creatives can do that, right? When you tell your point of telling a story, you could lay out the facts, you could lay out all the information about all the stuff that you learn in interviews, but if you don't put it in the story like that, no one's really going to remember.
Yeah, let's call it poetic license. And I can also go a little further. So I've experienced this before. I want to say interviewed, but it's more like I've harangued physicists who are friends of mine to say, hey, would this be possible? So I push it, I keep it realistic, but when it comes to technology, I can go just a little over what is done today. I can take prototypes or things that are theoretically quite possible, and I can then imagine how they might be used or interact with other existing technologies. And if I have a superpower, I think that's what it is a lot of my stories take technologies or very near-term future technologies and combine them in unexpected ways. And that always has a really catalyzing effect on society. I think the smartphone is probably the best and most obvious example of that. I mean, you have a computer and you have a phone, and you combine those two things, and suddenly huge change. They both existed for a long time, but it was the combination of the two. And so that is going to happen time and time again when it comes to space. The combination of these existing technologies or near future technologies, creating a step change. And we're going to have a ringside seat for that in the next few years.
Well, you say near future technologies, and again, going back to the term realistic, you're not talking about something that could be violating physics. Nothing you're talking about is that you're not talking about warp drives or black holes or any of those things. I mean, these are very foundationally sound concepts that, in most cases, and honestly, I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, they're already being developed in some way, shape, or form. These are already in some stage of development.
Yeah, certainly in Delta V and critical mass, all of the technologies there are either on the drawing boards. NASA has prototypes. I did a great deal of research to find projects that were abandoned. Typically, they were abandoned for political reasons or timing reasons. Or the underlying technology extremely sound. The asteroid retrieval mission was a good example in Delta V, how I took technologies that were developed for that. In JPL, they were actually building the beginnings of a prototype. I took that out of mental mothballs, and put it to a different purpose. But, there's so many imaginative ideas. Look at critical mass, Gerard K. O'Neill's mass driver. All of these ideas, they were technologically possible in the 1970s. Yep. So it's a mindset. And that's the other thing I really want to explore in these stories, is the character's mindset of the explorer, because that is what we're addressing here, is a new frontier. And that sounds cliche, but space really is the frontier. And we need the explorer mentality to go and explore it. I'm often amazed when I see hundreds of people every year mounting expeditions to climb Mount Everest. And invariably, several of them, not every year, but several of them die. People die base jumping and cave diving. All of these pursuits, I think these people who are driven to do these very risky behaviors, I think they're part of us. I think they're part of our culture, every culture in society. They're the ones who pathfind and trailblaze and chart oceans. And that's what we need for space. We need this type of spirit of exploration. And to have all those people going out, and I think risk is in their nature. And I think we need to embrace that. We need to understand that we need to do this. It's quite urgent.
We need to encourage it and inspire it. I couldn't agree. I am inspired that you're getting emails from people that are taking up roles in this field because of what they read and inspired. That is a testament to your capability.
Wow. I'm appreciative. Let's put it that way. And I'm going to try to keep doing it, because I know how I was inspired by writers. Carl Sagan was just one of the great science communicators, but just about every sci-fi writer that existed inspired me in many ways. So if you're taking a step back, and again, our audience, what we're really shooting for are those. You even said it yourself. You talk to your physicist friends and make sure that things are within the realm of possible. I 100% agree. There needs to be this connection between these different types of people to solve these big problems. If there's anyone out there that's listening now that is a creative, what would you say to encourage them, or is there any advice you have for them to get started specifically in supporting space? Is there anything that, I don't know what type of creative they are, but is there anything from your perspective that would be an encouragement or a pathway that could be available to them? Yeah, actually, I would say go to space conferences. You may not think that it's relevant to you. And I would say to any artist, even a visual artist, somebody who paints images, space is relevant to everybody right now. We're going to need all skill sets. It's going to be, say, like a golden age possibility, but it is this idea of a new industrial age. Pardon me. And that's going to require every single skill set. And finding your place in that is going to be an adventure. You're also going to meet so many interesting people. What I've found is very often really expert scientists who have a laser focused discipline, they don't often talk across their disciplines. They're very often speaking to people in their profession, their exact profession. This is very common. And one of the things an artist, a creative can do is to make connections. So I've done this before where I've spoken to scientists and say, this other person is doing this work. And what I was thinking, and that will cause all sorts of, there's cross-fertilization where they start to think and talk, oh, well, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that. So I don't want to say it's siloing, but in some ways it is. They work with great expertise within these silos, and we need much more crosstalk. And I think creatives can help that, helping to bridge those gaps between disciplines due to their extroversion or for whatever reason, writing stories about it, doing videos.
Couldn't agree more. We definitely have an echo chamber problem, and it's not even my perspective. It's not even inside of just inside of, like, say, NASA with somebody working on this particular communication technology. It's within industry. So you often don't have aerospace deeply talking to transportation. Or other opportunities where they're not necessarily connecting. And I love the advice of going to a conference. I went to my first space conference, and that's where I met Lieutenant Colonel Pete Gerritsen. At my first space conference, I said some crazy stuff, and he's like,
I want to talk to that guy. He's what he said. You and we met at a virtual, it was during the pandemic, but we met at a space conference, and I would sit and listen. I feel like, the scribe sitting on the edge listening to the adults talk about big stuff. But I would then go away and I would highlight things like, I need to know what this term is. I need to know what that is. Or I would contact people offline and say, hey, can I ask you some questions? Very often they were extremely cooperative and would tell me and help me tell an accurate story, which is, that's the thing that I think is so rewarding for an artist, is to be able to work with people who are building this future.
I want to touch on a topic as we're getting close to the end of the close of the first segment here. But the only thing that survived from an ancient civilization up until recent civilization was a story. It was the myths.
Yeah.
Now I find that to be insanely powerful. If we're thinking about, none of our technology survived, none of our capabilities survived, none of the cities survived, none of the transportation, nothing survived except for the story. And that myth is what we ended up being able to build megalithic structures and farming and herding and all that stuff. But it was a creative that somehow got that story across. I mean, it may not even been the same language, right? No. But that's the power to me. That is the ultimate power of creative. Like, that's what lasted. That's what lasts.
That's fascinating. And I often think of it, this is the software guy in me, I often think of the beliefs and what motivates us, the stories we tell ourselves. That's like the firmware of us. And we pass it down from generation to generation, what motivates us and drives us. And in story, there are certain recurring archetypes, things that are relevant, that resonate no matter the culture or the time. And I think that's part of that firmware you're talking about. And by saying firmware, I make it sound so inelegant, but it really is a beautiful thing that we pass down, these instincts, these drives to do these things. And so the stories we tell ourselves can be either nihilistic or hopeful, that can be aspirational, pessimistic. So we sort of have to be careful the firmware we load into our minds, what we think. There's being Pollyanna-ish, of course, but I think the bigger risk right now is to be too doom latent, too focused on, well, we can't stop this or we can't do that. I meet so many people who are doing amazing things in space and in tech, in science. We can definitely solve our problems, the challenges ahead of humanity. And I often think that there were periods in history where things looked very dark. And then, for example, the industrial age started. A lot of people look at that and say, oh, industrial age is so depressing. And yet lifespans doubled. That's not a minor thing. People used to die from, acne. We achieved so many things to increase both the length and the quality of life around the world. I think we could go even better. So that's sort of the story that I'm interested in telling right now.
I love it, Dan. So there are asteroid planet killer conversation I want to have with you. More about ancient civilization conversation I want to have with you, and definitely more of. I mean, you talked about in critical mass. You talked about synthetic biology that's to cure some cancer. A lot of fun things I want to talk about.
Okay.
But we talked about that in the on the other segment for the Nebula Insiders. Daniel, I want to thank you so much for being here with us today. And if anyone wants to reach out to you, what is the best way for them to get in contact with you, to get this book? Please get this book. If you're a space enthusiast, you have to get this book, Delta V and Critical Mass, coming out here right as we launch this podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I will say you could go to daniel-suarez.com to learn information about me and my books. And also, I am going to be touring for this book. So I'm going to be at Romans in Pasadena I'm looking at the map here, February 1st, Mysterious Galaxy down in San Diego, February 6th, Books Inc. in Palo Alto on February 8th, and Poison Pen in Phoenix on February 17th. And finally, University Bookstore up in Seattle on February 22nd. And I always love to meet my readers. So if you can come out and see me, I would love to see you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dan.
My pleasure.